This session's going to be rather informal, and we want it to be discussion-based, so feel free to ask the conservators questions that you might have. And also, they're taping the sessions, so if you can raise your hand, and they will run to you with a microphone so that we can all hear. And the lights are so bright that I cannot see any faces, so if you're somebody I know and I don't say your name, that's exactly why. So, as I said, this session is alternatives and choices in current research methods, but if I had had my druthers, we would have titled this War Stories. And the reason I say that is because this is a war. We are fighting hard to preserve very important art that's out there in the world that not everyone has always valued and felt was important. But the people on this panel are the soldiers that go out every day and fight the battles to see that things are preserved, stabilized, cleaned, ready for museum exposition, or many times preserved, conserved so that they can stay in situ. And it's not an easy task. There are many, many difficulties and challenges that arise. And I probably should have introduced myself. I'm Terry Yoho. I'm the Executive Director, soon to retire, at Kohler Foundation. So at this roundabout, we're going to talk about challenges in conservation. And in this title slide, you see John Salas out there, alone, in the heat, working on Passaquan. But challenges, we will call conservators in and say, hey, we've got a project. And when they see it, it looks like the slide that you see. It may be rubble, and by the grace of God, we may have vintage photos so that they have documentation of what we're working for or what this may add to. And this actually did turn out to be something pretty incredible. Overgrowth. When we work outdoors and things have been left to go to nature for a year or two or 10 or 20 or sometimes more, things can be completely encased in overgrowth, not to mention lichen, other biological growth that has to be dealt with. And the weather. See that thermometer? That was from Passaquan. Those guys worked out there in the heat many, many days for 2 summers in temperatures in excess of 100 degrees, not to mention the humidity. By the same token, we sometimes do work where we actually have to heat the ground to thaw it so that we can dig for something. Or in this case, Shane Winter from International Artifacts. Those are L.L. Bean waders, and he is in the slop up almost to the top of those waders, trying to recapture a piece that had fallen into the muck. And then weight. When we work on art environments, and think of those that you visited or have seen photos of, when we have to move those pieces, we bring in a lot of heavy equipment. Cranes, not unusual. Strong guys, strong women, the gamut. That was a piece, I think, in Iowa from the, Susan, help me, is that Madeline Boole? From the Madeline Boole Grotto just over the Mississippi River. Dehumidification. When we worked in Maine, nobody told us that summer only lasted 5 minutes, or that the air, which was humid all year, was filled with salt. So thankfully, Ron Harvey and Shane Winter advised us, and they built these major dehumidification chambers, and we had to dehumidify pieces for a year to get enough moisture out that they could be worked on. And then art handling. We're good customers of U.S. art, but they don't go out into an art environment and dig and pick up and pack. So we have to find the right resources, working with our conservators and other skilled professionals to do that kind of work. But for a conservator, it's not always about being in the lab with a tiny little artifact. Some of these things are quite major. Accessibility. People who work for Kohler Foundation learn that a shovel is their best friend. We often have to relay foundations under sculptures, and we have to be very careful who does that work. If we hire in just a general contractor, they don't have the expertise or the care that a conservator at the other end of a shovel does. And then there's paintings, which just suffer from incredible loss. This is something that Parma Conservation did for us. That's Will Rogers. It ended up in the Will Rogers Museum. But incredible amounts of loss and just brought back to a thing of great beauty. I'm a non-drinker, and my staff was very excited to get a picture of me standing on a bar in a Wisconsin tavern to look at that particular mural, which was so incredibly filthy from years of being in a smoke-filled tavern that when Parma Conservation attempted to clean it, the nicotine ran down in yellow streaks. But they were able to bring back this amazing Ernest Hupperton mural.
You can smell it. It's like you're in the bar. Our lab smelled like the bar. Yeah. Just no pull tabs.
So lots and lots of challenges. And I wanted to share one before and after from Passaquan, which was a combined effort. This was an enormous art environment with 900 linear feet of fencing, a number, I think 6 buildings, various sculptural pieces, art in the house, art outside of the house, and was a major undertaking for us. When we had looked at the project 10 years ago, we felt that it was too much of a challenge. If Kohler Foundation hadn't stepped in and preserved the Garden of Eden, and at the same time began working with Parma Conservation, we would not have had the skill set, known the right people to pull in a project of this magnitude. And it's only through those kinds of collaborations that art environments can come back to life, because it's not a one conservator project. It truly takes a village, and it takes a village of conservators, technicians, interns, and other staff and professionals. But today we have 4 people who I think will have a lot of interesting information for you. But as I said, we want to make this back and forth. Think about where you've been, what you've seen, what you've done, and pose questions, because they're here to answer. They'll also share a little bit about their individual practices, which are hugely, hugely varied. First on my left is Megan Mackey, who is a conservator of decorative arts and sculpture in private practice in Middleton. She probably works on most of the nice things, because she does mostly studio work. She doesn't get out in the field too often. But she opened her private practice in 2006. She interned at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and was employed by the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She has an undergraduate degree in art history and visual arts from Princeton University, and graduate degrees in art history and conservation from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University. And Megan has worked for us on some of the EVB that you see displayed this week. She's also helped with the art that we have acquired from Spaces. She's worked on a lot of the Stella Waitskin work. She was very involved in the Ray Yoshida collection, did much work on Nick Chand, and also, if you look at the Spaces exhibit and see Charlene from Possum Trot and a couple of other Possum Trot pieces that were beyond filthy, Megan really brought them beautifully back to life, did an excellent job. And next on our panel is John Salas. He's a senior conservator and structural engineer of paintings with Parma Conservation in Chicago. They really are one of the country's leading resources for the conservation of paintings and murals. If there's a WPA post office mural out there, there's a good chance they've seen it, they may have worked on it. He's worked on a wide variety of conservation projects all across the U.S. I know he's in Minnesota right now when he's not here, but churches, courthouses, state capitals, schools, and many WPA-era post office murals. He was the project manager for the conservation of paint and painting and all artistic services at Passaquan, which was an intense 2-year project with Kohler Foundation. He's worked on the Jesse Howard paintings that you see exhibited, the signs, but also Ernest Hupperton, Sanford Darling, Mary Noel. And it's very commendable that when John was in Georgia, and he was there for a long time without going home, he established Buena Vista Projects, a gallery and workspace for student artists. He's an accomplished painter and sculptor on his own, has shown in many, many galleries and universities. He studied at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. He's been active in the field of conservation since 2003, and when he's not in the lab or on a project, he's out on his bike. He's really an avid cyclist. And Ben, who we weren't expecting to see today, is, and if I can pronounce his name right, we just call him Ben, Kajiwa. Is that close? Kagiwa. Ben is our go-to person with international artifacts on projects that involve concrete. So Passaquan, the Garden of Eden, Prairie Moon in Wisconsin. Just went back and did some conservation work on the North Prairie houses in Wisconsin. He's worked at Mary Knoll. If it's been in Kohler Foundation in the last decade,
Yeah.
and there's concrete or wood, Ben's been on the project. Ben, you're gonna have to share where your degree is from because
Undergrad degree at University of Delaware for art conservation.
for art conservation. And his partner is Shane Winter, and together they make international artifacts. And then Jason Church, the one conservator on the panel who we haven't worked with, but he is the reason that the Divine Disorder series of conferences is here in Wisconsin. I had presented in Atlanta, and Jason very graciously accepted our invitation or our offer to co-host with NCPTT and the Art Center. So Jason is truly a scientist. He's a materials conservator in the Materials Conservation Program at the National Center for Preservation, Technology, and Training, NCPTT. And he's out of Louisiana. He works in the Research and Training Office of the National Park Service. He divides his time between original research, field work on outdoor sculpture and architectural materials, and organizing various trainings and conferences. Before joining NCPTT, he was a conservator for the city of Savannah, Georgia, the Department of Cemeteries. So we think he's on our team because he works with some of the same materials. He earned his MFA in Historic Preservation from Savannah College of Art and Design and is a professional associate of the American Institute of Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. And the really interesting thing about Jason is, well, he sounds very formal. He's as passionate about outdoor environments as the rest of us. So, I have a couple prepared questions that I'd kind of like to start with. But before we do that, I'd really like each conservator to talk a little bit about the challenges that they have faced, a few war stories, if you may. Megan?
Thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, I'm a little bit different in my work than my colleagues here because I work primarily out of my studio and not on site. So I suspect my war stories are not nearly as extreme as theirs.
Think mice.
Mice, yes. Many of the works that do come to my studio are interesting because they are infested with rodents or insects, or had been, and the remnants remain. Also, sometimes I haven't had too much experience with nicotine stains from self-taught artists, but certainly the possum trut mud is an example of some real tough layers to get through. I think that one of the best parts about working with self-taught artists is the surprise of the materials that come by me. And sometimes those present their own challenges, both from researching how to deal with them and then figuring out how to work with them. For example, chicken bones, BB chicken bones, Gregory Van Manen bird skulls and feathers. There are times when the condition is expected to remain somewhat rustic, shall we say? And so
We like to retain patina and age.
Yes, and trying to decide just how much mud to take off is a good example of that. So I would say that it's more for me, since I'm not in the actual environments, it's more the challenges of the unusual material.
Okay. John?
But challenges in our field, it goes from, I mean, dealing with weather and humidity and storms and lightning and cigarette smoke and then working outdoors at Passaquan specifically was.
Why don't you give us a day in the life at Passaquan?
A day in the life of Passaquan, yeah. Well, it depended on the weather, and what was going to be going on that day. The humidity, especially when you're working with, paint and porous cement surfaces, you'd have to sort of get there and see, and what wall you were working on, if the sun was hitting it or if you were in shadow. What happened the night before, how hot it was going to be that day, where the sun was going to be. And what crew you were working with and who was going out, with sort of the shifting.
We should share a little bit about your crew. As a client, we always have to be sensitive to what it's going to cost and to stay within a budget. And one of the ways we sometimes manage that is by giving lesser tasks to interns. And John did an amazing thing and took 3 young men essentially out of the projects in Buena Vista, Georgia, who had never done anything with art in their lives. And he mentored them and not only made them productive citizens, taught them, you're not on your telephone when you're working. You show up at 8 o'clock and you leave when your supervisor tells you you're finished. But he taught them about art and really, by taking them under his wing, shared the respect and the love for the genre and changed 3 human beings in a pretty significant way.
Well, one aspect of that was like being immersed in the town of Buena Vista, Georgia, was to not be separate from the community, is to bring the community into it. So that was to hire some of the local guys and bring them into it. Yeah. So and it turned out to be very rewarding.
Okay. Ben, just a little bit. Want to pick maybe the Garden of Eden and working on that?
I think
Wind and height and
well, with the Garden of Eden, most of the challenges involved the stability of the ground, having to deal with frost and heave cycles, especially with lengths of concrete fence where there's a lot of movement, and trying to figure out materials that'll work with that movement, or trying to eliminate that movement. Another challenge is steel armatures that, when rusting occurs, there's a lot of spalling and expansion of that steel and rust within the sculpture, and trying to mitigate
and
that.
because of that, sometimes it's our preference if a piece is broken. You would think if a piece was in horrible condition, it would be a disaster. But sometimes for the conservator, it then allows them entree to change out some of those armatures.
Yeah, removal of a lot of that material that'll rust and continue expansion might be preferable in that situation.
Okay.
But kind of it's a balancing act between how much original to maintain and
Okay.
I'm blocking. Which Garden of Eden? Who's the artist?
oh, SP Dinsmore.
Dinsmore, Lucas, Kansas, the geographic center of the United States. Go ahead, Jason.
So for me, I work a lot with outdoor sculptures. Terry said earlier, I work a lot with historic cemeteries and a lot with vernacular grave marker makers. And for me, I work all over the country. I get calls and emails constantly, and they'll send me pictures, or I'll go to a site that's essentially a field or a woods, and they'll say, well, this is our cemetery. And you go, well, I'll take your word for it. We've got to go in there. Because, sometimes I worked with a cemetery, for example, in Houston, where the cemetery was blocked off completely from access for 40 years. So completely unmaintained. No one had access to it at all, including for legal reasons, their own family members until recently. So, what do we do when we go back in after 40 years? And a lot of times that's a great thing because we haven't had these practices of landscape maintenance where everyone wants, the ninth hole of a golf course, they haven't mowed it to death. And so the monuments haven't been struck and damaged in that way. We have heirloom plantings that are still left now because of it. So in a lot of ways, it's a good thing. But then going back and not only for me, especially working with vernacular grave makers, it's convincing the people invested in that itself is a very important resource. Because a lot of times everyone gets really excited about the big Italian angel, and they overlook the small handmade concrete markers with the marbles pressed into it, or that's carved in the wet concrete. That's maybe even more important than these really expensive things. That these are the hands of an artist, a lot of times of a loved one. So I work with that a lot.
Jason, I'm not sure you're aware, but some of our artists whose sites we have preserved have also made their own grave markers.
Yes.
We've got some really cool ones in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I will ask my questions to kind of direct this unless someone wants to initiate some discussion. Dennis Saporsky, Chauvin, Louisiana.
Yeah, well, my question is cement, the expansion of metal. Oh, I gotta use this. The expansion of metal inside of cement. We have a very toxic environment, is one way to put it. One of our decisions as a group was we felt it was better to recoat the pieces with some kind of sealant, which we thought outdoor paint. Is there a type of cement paint that would be recommended over outdoor latex enamels? Is there a specific? Or do you guys just use paint?
Instead of latex enamels.
Anybody?
Oh, instead of latex enamels? Well,
Well, for a sealant, no. I mean, I don't know of a sealant for cement. That's, what we used in Passaquan was the opposite, was a paint that could breathe and let moisture in and out.
Even with the metal inside that rusts?
See, I can't,
Well-
that's objects.
Yeah.
the paint that you used was also designed to accept another H100 coating, which is a silica-based.
So there is a special coating that we
Yeah,
should put
and
on it.
It repels water, but it also works in conjunction with
Okay.
that
Yeah.
that paint.
And where do you get that? At Lowe's or?
Well, it
No.
It's
repels
specialized.
water, but it doesn't seal.
So the problem with sealing, the concept of sealing is that you're making this waterproof coating.
Right.
Well, the reality is only part of the water entering that sculpture is coming from the rain.
Right.
A good chunk of it's coming right up out of the earth. And I know your site well, that's where a lot of your water's coming from, is right up, especially the constant flooding and just, dew point, humidity. So the idea of sealing over top, that water comes up, sun heats it, it's got to go somewhere. So that's going to prematurely fail that surface and cause more rusting on the inside because now you're trapping water in it. So what John was saying was, so they're using paints that are breathable. Latex is a plastic coating. Now, there's a fine balance. Yes, maybe that's what the artist used, and that's a theoretical question on intent and what the artist used. But also, if we're going with like we saw in Tellin yesterday, there's lots of those that have very little paint left. If we were to decide to go back, maybe something a more breathable, like a lime-based paint or a silica-based paint might be better. And I'll turn that over to some of the things that you guys are using.
Are we doomed because it's coming up through the ground? Is it long-term, it was that the metal would expand so much inside that it would destroy the pieces?
Dennis, in some of the cases where the pieces were in horrible disrepair,
Right.
I think that the metal was replaced with things that aren't rusting. So it's not every piece on the site, but there may come a point where someone is going to have to go in to the internal
Right.
and make some changes.
And that sounds, Chauvin, Folk Art Center in Chauvin, Louisiana.
The work of Kenny Hill,
Kenny
was the
Hill?
artist.
and it's right on the edge of the bayou.
Well, it's kind of in the bayou now a little bit, but yeah, you're right, so.
It has a tendency to flood, and when the site was restored, we like to say we were very clever, but we didn't know what we were doing. A chain link fence was put around the site. It acts like a colander, like a strainer, every time it floods. So we keep out the debris, which is very damaging, but we can't prevent the water from coming in.
Yeah, I don't quite know where to go. We've done the best we can to keep it going and preserve the pieces on our expertise, which is obviously lacking, but I don't know what
I
you guys.
was there in April, it looked really good.
Thank you. But if you have any recommendations, we'd appreciate it. So.
Well, pouring bases and putting it over, gravel drainage helps to a certain extent.
Okay, and I think that's Kevin Rose in the back?
Yes.
From the Turner Foundation in Springfield, Ohio.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah.
Kevin Rose, and I work with the Hartman Rock Garden, which is a 2009 Kohler Foundation site. So first, thank you for everything you guys have done for our community. One quick comment first on that last question. I think the most important thing that I could get out of this conference is hopefully some type of commitment that long term we're going to develop some type of a standards book. And I know that needs to be updated continually. We've been working with Don Howlett and Lisa Stone to just, we call them on the phone, I'm sure they hate us at this point, and just grill them with a million questions, and then they don't send us a bill at the end, which they should be doing. But we really need that in a field because we're amateurs out there. We might have art history background or architectural history, but if we can understand questions like that, like time paint, and when that should be used, and when certain inhibitors should be put onto objects, when they should not be put onto objects. My question is a little more difficult. I will not ask level of conservation, because I know you could do a conference on that. There's books on that. There was a great article recently on Shark Cathedral and the controversies of preserving and conserving the interior space there. But more specifically on sites like Hartman Rock Garden, when you have a family that maintained the site for 50 to 60 years after the death of their family member, how much consideration should be put into their techniques for conservation and also their wishes for conservation moving forward?
Who would like to touch that hot potato? Jason, you made eye contact.
So, all right. I think everyone has to make that decision when they start. Okay, what level are we going to take this back to? And, maybe it's, something like Passaquan where they go back to when St. OEM was there. So it's this very vibrant, they could have made the decision just to stabilize it as they found it. Of course, that's far from what the artist's intent was. And even though I think your site had been repainted for, 2 decades or something by volunteers?
Well, even when he was creating it, it was falling apart and being repainted. Yeah, it was being repainted from the beginning.
Yeah, so, that's one whole debate. Like, at what point are you going to go back to, or are you going to go back to anything? Are you just going to leave it as you found it and sort of stabilize it as is? So that's a first decision that has to be made. So that's the first decision that has to be made. And then, that's a sticky one. If you have the family still involved, that's a great time to, do oral histories and interviews and to get input from them. But it's also a good time to educate them, because if there is things that they've been doing that even though they're like, oh, no, this is the way we do it, yeah, but it's not the right way, it's still also your responsibility to help, educate them. I don't think that answered your question at all. But
No, it does to a certain extent. And that question certainly bridges these two sessions that are happening simultaneously. And we have done that oral history. But
And Kevin, we've not really experienced that with a family coming back to us and not liking the strategy or the direction we were taking. We generally will make it pretty clear that we're picking a point in time and we're going back to that.
so on that, after you guys left the Hartman site, when we talked to the family, and I know you guys did include them, they said, we would really like to see these objects that have lost their paint over the past 20 years repainted. we really think the decayed state is not in keeping with Dad's wish, as Ruth would say. So we've worked with the family to talk about what those colors were, even though the colors are gone. And with their wishes, we've set a conservation policy that will repaint those objects because they feel as though that is the wish of their father, their grandfather, the artist of the site. So, and we know it's controversial because at a certain point, you're
is.
also adding something that's not there. But
And remember the relative that took things off-site and
George.
painted?
yes, and he's still involved in the site as well, and he
Oh.
doesn't like the way we do things. But
Okay.
Yeah, paint's a really hard one because with most of these sites, and I mean, I don't know about all of them, but a lot of them, we know that even when they were doing it, they were painting it, like the Prophet Isaiah site in Niagara Falls. He repaints it every year at the end of winter with no real, just it's what he wants to paint it then. And the paint layers on it, I have some photographs where you can kind of see, I mean, they're going already at a measurable, probably 1/16 of an inch thickness on everything. And he's not even been doing it very long. If he keeps going for a decade, you'll have a 1/4 inch paint layer. So where do we go back? Is it at the end or the beginning or somewhere in the middle? I think most of these sites, they're constantly changing. So I mean, that's a really hard debate to have amongst yourself. I mean, you have to decide. And if the family, and I understand their wishes, if they want it the vibrant that Dad preferred it, maybe, then that's one issue there.
And when things are painted back to a very new state, we will often have people from the community come in and say, oh, I liked it the way it was. This isn't what I remember. And the other contingency, oh, it's back to the way it was when I was a child. So I don't think that, Kevin, you're ever going to keep everyone happy. You have to, as the owners of the site now, you have to make the best decision and work with them to the best of your ability. Whoa.
I saw a hand over here first. I just want to ask a question about, instead of directly going to, we have to restore these sites fully and we have to repaint these sites. Is there missions out there to catch the deterioration now for newer sites and preserve them using, these breathable coatings and, as conservators know, these new things we can do instead, and so in the future we won't have to do such massive undertakings and change these sites. So
Are you asking if we can get into the process sooner?
yeah, is there any for more modern, more contemporary sites? Is somebody tracking them now? So across Wisconsin, say, is Kohler kind of looking out for new sites that are being made or sites that haven't deteriorated
That's really
completely?
interesting. We always have a number of sites across the country on our radar. We are occasionally called in to consult and ask, but if an artist is still active, I don't think we would try to interfere. Go ahead.
I'm a actual paintings conservator, and I work on the hoity-toity stuff, and so this stuff is like a passion for me, not my profession so much.
Can you tell us your name?
Robert Proctor. My firm has worked on the Clementine Hunter murals in Natchitoches, so we do this work too. But I would just encourage people to look outside of just this group of people, because all of these issues of historic context, restoration versus conservation. I mean, restoration in the elite is always a dirty word, but it shouldn't necessarily be. But we need to really, I think, think of both of these ways. When we start talking about these, E100s and things like this, and for conservation, you can be going down a really scary road sometimes with the reversibility issues and things like this. And sometimes restoration is actually preferable because it'll fall apart. But then on the other hand, you know, you lose, earlier you were talking about, you know, we really value patina, but then again, now we repaint things, and it's really, all these things are discussed in the field, and there's, you know, the pendulum swings back and forth, and there are a lot of decisions being made, and I just encourage the people that deal with, you know, self-taught artists, folk artists, these things, to look towards the field, because these people have wrestled with these same things. You know, and I was thinking earlier when we were talking about in the earlier session about context and taking things into the white cube, and it's like, you know, you can say this about a botanical garden. You can say this about a museum for, you know, the Holocaust. It's not like going to Dachau, but all these things. But these things are not just this field. They are endemic in the field of preservation, architectural, you know, natural history, biology, and so really, I think it's really important that we look abroad, in a much more broader area. And okay, thank you for letting me proselytize.
My concern is the community engagement that has to take place. Even last night with that lovely little Tellon area, how do you keep that from being vandalized unless you really have security all the time?
Where are you from?
I'm Sister Carolyn Cawley. I'm a folk artist here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And the community engagement is very interesting to me.
Okay, first of all, we'll knock on wood, but vandalism and theft are almost negligible. Last year, someone took a head off of one of the little people in the tavern scene at Tellon, and Ben actually worked and restructured a new head for it and replaced it based on the best photo documentation we had. We had searched high and low, a number of people thinking maybe somebody had tossed the head and we'd be able to find it. Well, lo and behold, Ben is no more than finished with replacing that head, the substitution, and here the original head shows up, not far, right in plain sight at Tellon. I think whatever teenage boy took it home, Mom saw it and said, "Get it back." We have problems at Tellon with people doing wedding photos and graduation photos. They sit on the fences and break them. That's job security for Ben and his crew. So we try to put signs up, but somehow, by some amazing thing, vandalism is not a big problem for us. And community engagement is one of the biggest challenges of our jobs. We can find wonderful art all the time. We have these amazing people who can preserve it. But unless there's a steward to take on responsibility for the site, like the Art Center has for Tellon, it won't continue. So we have to find that right recipient and someone who will do community outreach, who will do programming. We have a number of the recipients here. We have Ricky Rolfsmeyer from Grandview. We have Dennis and Gary from Chauvin. Oh, Jared's here? Jared is here from the Wagner Grotto. I'm probably forgetting others or haven't spotted them yet. But, I mean, those people should speak up. Between the conservators and the recipients who are the stewards into the future, those are the real heroes in this process. And you have to engage the community, and you have to bring young people in so there's a succession plan. Because what happens is we take over these sites, and all of a sudden everybody's gray-haired. And we need to have had young people come in and feel ownership in what's there and want to preserve it in much the way that the first people on site did. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Sorry, we have a question over here.
I'm going back to the comment on the contemporary builders. For instance, Dr. Charles Smith is a very savvy artist.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't he benefit from the knowledge of a kind of paint that might preserve it, why wouldn't he also be interested in the long-time life of his piece and your counsel regarding materials that would help him?
He has complete and full access to us. He can ask those questions. He actually worked with us on the preservation of the first batch that we did. So he saw how the materials had deteriorated and what we were doing on the next step to restore them. Is Dr. Smith here in the audience?
He's here somewhere.
He's here. I'll ask him that question.
I just wondered if because of that relationship, perhaps he has
He's a pretty
changed some
stubborn
of his
guy.
practices.
I love him, but he's stubborn.
Thank you.
The Magic Gardens in Philadelphia, talking about neighborhood, has thousands of people going through, 100,000 people going through. Heads are broken, hands are broken, things disappear. We don't even know how or why. There are, Emily could tell you much more tomorrow, but, and we had to go down to Mexico and find all the people who did a lot of the work that Isaiah included in the Magic Gardens to maybe do them again. But when he used them in the Magic Gardens, they were broken to begin with. He used them because they were broken. So when you go back to a craftsman and say, we need the woman that was carrying a pineapple on her head, they say, but she has to have broken hands, or what are you going to do with the, they say, we don't do it with broken hands. I'm sorry, we only do all the arms and all the whole piece. So we've had to catalog now, and we are buying pieces from Mexico that we will keep in our warehouse to use as those pieces disappear.
So
a lot
an
from
inventory of supplies.
inventory. So exactly. And the other thing is, of course, not just people breaking things, but the weather is a big deteriorator.
When you walked into the art center, there's the Baker House, the structure with all the little tchotchke ceramics. Don Howlett and Lisa Stone worked on that. And because they couldn't replace, maybe a little doggy or a whatever ceramic, where they couldn't, if you look at it closely and you don't see it at first glance, they simply filled and left it as a neutral. And Megan, we have seen do remarkable things where she will put in a composite. The one I remember is some Neck Chan sculptures where we couldn't find the coins. They were no longer in circulation. So what did you do, Miss Megan?
I don't remember.
I remember. You made some sort of composite and were able to tone it. We had people searching all over India for those coins, and they were no longer in circulation.
I remember that.
Yeah, anyhow, okay, now
Michael
it's working.
McFalls from
Hi, I'm Michael
Passaquan.
McFalls from Passaquan, and I want to go back to the question about when to preserve and then when to kind of restore something, and maybe with the painting, because Passaquan had this unique opportunity. We didn't have family like Kevin, like you were describing. Eddie was gone. There was nobody to tell us how to, or tell them how to do it. And so I was hoping that John could perhaps talk about the decisions that were made on when to conserve. We know that Eddie Martin, as Katie Gentleson pointed out when she was talking about Howard Finster, that Eddie Martin's place was in constant flux. He was painting all the time, and we have multiple images of different walls with different colors. And maybe you could talk about, as a conservator, how do you make the decisions on which way to paint it, and the decisions that Parma was making, and maybe that could kind of start this handbook, because I agree, I think there needs to be a handbook on this. We're all at this in the
handbook,
beginning.
it would be a lot thicker than
But
a
you were the
handbook.
experts making this
yeah.
decision, and I'm wondering if you could just talk about, when there is no family involved, and you can do what you need to do or what you think you need to do. How did you make those decisions, I guess, as a group?
With Passaquan, we looked at every single photograph and piece of film that we could possibly find. And then, and we had film of Eddie painting and film of Eddie working with visitors and college students, and he'd literally put a brush in their hand and hand them a can of paint, and they would just be painting and talking and painting and talking, and you know, it was sort of put this color here, put this color there, were his instructions. And then when we got there, we were just sort of like, wow, what are we gonna, this is an amazing coloring book, what are we gonna do? So the first thing that we did was we photographed every square inch of the place.
And color matched.
Yeah, we had an intern walk around with a Pantone book and a camera, and she documented the whole place for, I don't know, a couple of months it took her, maybe more, and then mapped everything out and and printed everything out, and we had, I think, about 20 3-ring binders filled with pages and of each wall and each totem that we could look at, you know, and I was also there looking at all the different places and noting down all the different colors. But when you looked at one design, you at one little triangle, you would see 7 different colors on that triangle. So which color do you pick? You know, what stage do you go to? And so with all the photographs and all the, I mean, you know, 30 years he was making this, and 30 years he was painting it a different color. So which one do you pick? And well, we did our best to bring it all together into one.
When I give a tour, I'm asked that question all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I told them that, you know, about the Pantone chart and things like that, but I always find it difficult to say, well, not sure actually how they made the exact decision. A lot of it was based off of photography, a lot of it's based off of the oldest photography that they had, and maybe the last layer of paint that they Pantone charted in that area, but sometimes
it was somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Every single decision was somewhere in the middle of all that, yeah.
And thank you to all the photographers out there who have donated their work to places like Spaces or sent us photographs, because that's how we do the work. We need that vintage photography.
Yeah, a lot of photographs were donated, and just digging through the archives of that, and talking to local people, the people that knew Eddie and that were friends of his, you know.
Wasn't there some pairing with a paint company at some point when they were doing restoration? Somehow remember reading that, like that very first restoration. I don't know what year it was. Like Benjamin Moore. Yeah, Passaquan.
Yeah, there was some rumors that Sherman Williams was involved, but we have some records of that, but that's just rumor. I think it's speculation.
I read it though, I'm certain.
Yeah. Fred Fussell would probably be able to answer that question better.
Somehow him involved, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, and John and Peter at Parma together have how many years of experience paint matching and mixing?
Well, we worked in a lab for years, yeah.
Lots of years. I mean, they're really, really good at color.
Well, and also just, this project, we wanted to get it right, you know, as right as we possibly could.
So I have a very personal question for people like you. Kohler comes in and puts a lot of money into preserving the work, and then you have it. Now, for instance, I've been doing work since 1968 with cement, and I've colored the cement. During that time, the lime has leached out the color, so there are over 250 murals that I've done, mosaic murals, in the city of Philadelphia, and they're decaying. But where do you get the money to preserve this Passaquan after they do it?
It's a very difficult question. we're working on it as we speak. We're constantly fundraising. Last year, I think we raised over $50,000 just in private money just to help continue programming and restoring the site. But it's a constant battle for the university. But we are a university, and we see the yes, a university foundation that owns the property. And we see it fitting right into the mission of the university. So we have students from UGA, students from Auburn doing work on the site. Some of them are from preservation groups, some of them are actually art historians, and so the university president sees it connecting to our educational mission. In some ways that helps. And then there's outside grants. We have a friends group. In fact, we're doing some marketing where 15% of sales will come back for preservation efforts only. So there's a lot of ways we're trying to do this, but it's an uphill battle, to say the least. It'd be great to have one big endowment to keep this thing going.
How about in Chauvin? How are you doing?
We do some of the same tricks that our colleague just talked about. It is good to be connected to the university. That stabilizes things, but in Louisiana, universities are having a hard time too. And our university is 60 miles away from the site, and we have to constantly remind our university about how important Chauvin is. I mean, the university cares about Chauvin, but the university also has this other list of priorities that oftentimes are above the sculpture site. So that can be a little good and a little bad. But I see, for the most part, it being a good thing to be connected to the university, because generally, and through student work and student stewardship and classes, it does get constant attention. But money is hard to come by.
We have the same problem as we're 45 miles from the campus, so there's this out of sight, out of mind. Sometimes that's good, but sometimes you have to constantly re-educate people and say, in the administration, and say, hey, this place is out there, you own it. We got to keep care of it, and it's a constant fight.
So at Hartman, I think I can offer an interesting perspective, although it's similar. We don't tell the public, but Hartman's owned by two philanthropic foundations that joined forces and own the site. It's something I would challenge Kohler to think about more, and I think you probably do. There's challenges in every community, but working for a philanthropic foundation, we restored a Frank Lloyd Wright house and spent about $6 million doing it, and if we could go back and do it again, we would not spend all of that, or we would challenge the community to fundraise for its long-term care to make sure that happens. What we do is we ask for donations at the site. We've received in 8 years about $30,000 just from visitors putting money into a donation bin, which I never thought was possible. And then we challenge the community to step up and help. But I wish that we would have been more active while Kohler was still in town, to go out to people and say, listen, Kohler's going to invest, up to $1 million or what was invested there. Can you give $10,000 for the long-term care? Can you give $20,000 for the long-term care? Because what ultimately happened is Kohler did provide some money to finance what they wanted to see happen but couldn't happen in time. But we're then left with a site that still needs restoration, that needs a lot of maintenance, has people walking on the sidewalks, cats knocking things over, a little bit of vandalism, and we don't have that pool of resources. The foundations are there, but they don't want to put too much money in. They want the community to own it. So finding a strategy, and I know just like conservation, every community is different, but finding a strategy that can work in communities to say, hey, if we're going to invest $1 million here, this community needs to step up and have $100,000 set aside for this site for its long-term care.
I think we'll be talking about a lot of this at tomorrow in the turn signals section. I'm part of the board of directors for the Garden of Eden in Lucas, also a Kohler Foundation project. And we formed a new board to address these issues because we're in a very small, very poor town. We have no money in Lucas. And it's in fact going away as our population goes away. So we charge admission, and we earmark a part of our admission to the Preservation Fund We do have a box specifically for preservation fund, and we have one person on the board dedicated to not just getting a strategy for fundraising, but also making sure that we know where the site was when Kohler left through documentation and the preservation plan going forward, and about how much money all of that's going to cost, and a priority list so that we can fundraise for those specific things. Because we don't have university affiliation. This really is a board-run nonprofit in a small, underserved rural community of 400 people. And it is tough. And we had a 40-minute hailstorm 3 years ago that destroyed every roof in town, but only did, I'd say, medium damage to the garden itself. And that's where we are right now, is that we need to do that assessment to see where it is from now going forward. But money is hard, especially in, I live in Kansas. It's a very, very red state. So if you ask for money for an arts organization, it's not going to happen. But if you ask for money for preserving a cultural heritage site, and also a thing that tells a story that is a little bit divorced from the art world, but is actually grown up out of rural culture, you can find those other sources that you might not initially think of when you think of these art sites. They're not just art sites, they're community sites, and they're a part of these rural towns that they live in.
My question goes back sort of to the source of this whole thing. Terry, tell us, how did the foundation decide on this mission, this particular mission, and what is the process for identifying the sites that you're going to be involved in?
Okay, well, I think the genesis of why we do this is a pretty lovely story, and that is Ruth Kohler came into a family that the arts and education is in their DNA. And when the foundation was established in 1940, that was our mission. When Ruth was a little girl, she'd go driving around the countryside with her father, and they'd look at, roadside memorials, I don't know if you have these all over the country, the bathtubs on their side with the Virgin Mary in them, and other, interesting things around the countryside. That was what they did on weekends. They hopped in the car and drove around and looked for interesting things. And Ruth, of course, pursued a career in the arts, but in the 1970s, a family friend and someone who was involved in the Arts Center, Jake Jacobson, directed her up to Wisconsin Concrete Park. And she met Fred Smith, and she saw the art environment, and the only word that I can use is she was smitten. And so our path was laid, and so our direction was set, still within the original mission of Kohler Foundation to support the arts and education, but the preservation of art environments and self-taught art became a very big part of it. So where it's evolved to is we acquire art either through gift or purchase. If you've ever dealt with me, I probably said we'd much prefer a gift over having to purchase it, but we do when we have to, because that gives us more money to invest into the project. So we acquire art, hire fine people like those that are sitting here, Ron Harvey, who's sitting in the front row. So we preserve the pieces. In situ is our preference. If we can't, professionals don't like this word, but I have to tell you, we use it in the office. We will harvest what we can so that something can be saved, and prepare it so that it can be gifted to a white box, to a museum or other nonprofit. But those nonprofits can vary from tiny community libraries to the Smithsonian, major art institutions. In each case, we have a contractual agreement. We prepare the art, we gift it, it's theirs free and clear, no encumbrances in terms of they get the copyrights, everything they would want, but it becomes their property, and they are responsible for it into the future. If at any time they are unable to care for it or don't want to care for it, it reverts back to Kohler Foundation, and we find a new home for it. And that has actually happened in several instances. We took back a site in Wisconsin. It was owned by Sauk County, Wisconsin. Elected officials, as they aged, lost interest. It was costing them a few $1,000s a year They wanted it gone. We took it back and found Edgewood College in Madison, Wisconsin, who has done amazing things with that site, incredible community outreach, and they're keeping it beautifully preserved. So that's kind of how it works. And we have made gifts to about 300 museums, I think, over the last probably 15 years. Susan Kelly, where are you? How many pieces of art do you think we've gifted?
Thousands.
10,000?
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
That's a great story about how to shift from non-caring to a caring institution. And we are experiencing in our community a fight between, sort of science and art. And the community at this point is saying it's more important to teach the children science than it is art. And they're dividing with a giant wall. Are any of you working with sort of public programming that helps to break that wall down and be able to help develop support for, so I'm just looking for do you have any more success stories?
Leslie, I don't have a success story, but I will tell you that we make small grants in Sheboygan County, and STEAM initiatives versus STEM initiatives make our heart flutter in a whole different way. And we tend to support the STEAM initiatives that include art.
I think we're going to go alternate sessions.
Any other questions? Okay.
So I'm Jen Balgi. I work in the education department here, and we are one of the recipients of the KFI grants. And we, in response to the public programming, we do a few different things. We're really lucky we have a preschool in the Arts Center, so every year we bring the preschoolers out to Tellin and we take them on a tour led by docents, and we do concrete paver workshops so they get an experience to work with the materials. We also do family workshops out there, and we do this thing we call the Chair City Cookout, and we invite the community. It's a free event, so everyone can come there, and it's really interesting to see how the public will respond to it. A lot of people have never been there before, and sort of that they have an interesting relationship with it, where some parents will even place their children on top of sculptures and things, and then we have to go to them and say oh, hey, maybe don't go on the art. And it's really an interesting dynamic where they're really starting to learn about something that's been in their community for decades and they've never experienced it before. And we're so thankful for the KFI grants that enable us to bring people out there and offer these programs that they can really engage in the sites and understand more about why it's important. And I think that across the education department, we really believe in starting with young children like the preschoolers and doing family workshops so they grow up understanding these sites and really investing in them and having ownership over them. And that's how we get the community buy-in as well, where people will support the sites overall.
And one in the front.
Okay. My question is, I'm an artist and I work in concrete and I'm from Wisconsin, so I've been following everything that you do for a really long time.
Tell us your name so we know who you are.
Kim Wozniak.
Okay.
And so do you have any kind of a program if I would want to come and work on one of your conservation projects? How would I and volunteer my time as both a learning experience and because I care about the work that you're preserving? Do you have any kind of a way that I could become involved in that, or other people, other artists like myself?
Send us an email. But I have to say, artists often want to work on our projects. They're not easy to manage because they always want to improve everything.
Oh yeah, no.
But no, just send us an email. We'll keep your name on file. If we're working in the area, we will call.
Yeah, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be here. You know, like I would be willing, it's a learning thing. I'm interested in all of what you guys do.
Sure.
Thank you.
Touch base with me. I'll give you my card.
When you first go to a site for the preservation, what type of engineering study do you do? John or Jason?
I'm sorry, I was trying to find.
Oh.
What was the
Who was
question?
talking?
Can you
What
say?
kind of engineering study do you do
If
at
we
the
need an
sites?
engineer, we actually wouldn't ask our conservators to do that. We generally will borrow an engineer, a civil engineer from the Kohler Company, and we've taken them to any number of our sites where we've had drainage problems, structural problems with bridges and all those things. But John does have an engineering background.
In the structural engineering paintings. Yes, yes. I know how to build some things too, but
We all
to
know what we don't
help
know
out
how to
the
do,
paintings.
so we get professionals.
Yeah.
I have one more question. Chapter 2 of your book that you're putting out, mildew remover. Would you just use a commercial mildew remover on cement? Or would it be a bleach-based or none of the above?
A quick answer to the bleach base, no.
Mildew remover.
Yeah, so there's definitely biocides on the market that are specifically designed for historic stone and concrete. So yeah, I've actually talked to Deb about coming down and showing you guys some of those. But yeah, no, bleach is bad. One of the why bleach is so bad is it leaves chlorine salts behind, which will actually push your materials apart. Every time it resolubilizes, the sun dries it, it recrystallizes. It'll continue to push your materials apart, stone, concrete, what have you.
Great.
But yeah, no, there's commercial biocides, so cleaners designed to kill biological growth
Great.
and to keep it from coming back.
What's chapter 3?
Chapter 3.
I know in your
For
book.
you.
What are you guys going to do in chapter 3? I got chapter 2 already written. So.
Well, Dennis, for more information on that, Ron Harvey in front of you probably has a favorite brand that he uses, and Ben, what do you like to use for cleaning?
Prosecco, I guess, is it?
Okay.
We use.
Yeah, yeah. So there's quite a few. But
Again, say that word again.
Prosecco
Soco.
has a lot of herbicide biocides.
No. So like probably D2 is the easiest one to get a hold of now. It's a great product. You can get it on Amazon, and there's several suppliers.
Ron, what do you like to use? D2. D2?
But you have to know why you're using what you're using.
Thank you for your applause, Mr. Proctor.
All right, we're about out of time. Terry, do you have any last comments before we wrap up for lunch? Would you like to say anything more?
I just want to thank everyone for being here, because if you weren't doing what you were doing, nothing would be happening in this field. Without the passion for preserving this kind of art, nobody's going to find the funding, nobody's going to find the interest. So keep moving forward. We appreciate it. Thank you.